This is the Yamaha CS-30 from 1977. And if you watch this channel, you know I believe it is a masterpiece of engineering. It's a very unusual synth. It's Yamaha's flagship, biggest monophonic, fully analog instrument. And it is quirky as hell, and that is why I love it. So many interesting surprises await. I want to do a live patching session with you here, but it's a little tricky for two reasons. The first is getting this thing into the shot and getting it lit up is just difficult, at least for me. I'm not a video person, so I'm doing the best I can with that. Hopefully you can see what it is I'm going to be doing. The second thing that makes this tricky is that there are no presets, of course, so it's difficult to find sort of a generic starting point to do a patch. So I've just set up a basic patch here that I like pretty well, and we'll manipulate it and go through what I've done. Final disclosure is that I'm also running this through some outboard gear. Nothing too fancy, but I do need to explain what that is all about. So one of the things about the CS-30 and much of the CS line and the monophonic line is that it's really two synths, two distinct signal paths that can blend together, and they can work together. They can pass information to each other or not. They can, modulate each other or not. So there are three output jacks on the back of this instrument. There is the first synth output, the second synth output, and then a blend of the two. And I'm using all three and affecting them all differently. So to start, I can isolate the first synth, which is VCO1 running through VCF1, running through VCA1. But here we go. Okay, it's just a plain sawtooth, a single sawtooth, and it's going through an SPX 90, which is a 90s Yamaha, effects unit. It's just giving it some reverb. Let's listen to synth 2, and it's also going through a Strymon Volante, which is a sort of a tape emulation delay. And so if we blend everything, we get a mix output coming out of a third jack in the back. And that is being routed to the mixer and sent to some a PCM 60 room and then a big impulse reverb in the big sky. It's a bit of a cheat to get such a glorious sound, except it's not a cheat. It's how this instrument allows you to interact with it. So I'm doing all of that wet live, and I'm just going to leave it that way as we explore. Okay, so what is my patch doing? Well, as I mentioned, these are two sawtooth waves. And interestingly, on the CS-30, you choose, so the VCO1 and 2 are putting out square waves and sawtooth waves, and they're doing that independently, always simultaneously, internally, okay? Because you choose what you're going to route and what you're going to listen to on the VCF panel. Right, it's a little little different, something to get used to. You're giving an input to the VCF 1 and 2. One of the differences between the two VCFs is VCF 1 allows me to mix multiple sources before I go to the VCA, which is pretty interesting, and send that to a single filter if I want. VCF 2 only has one input, but it can take the output of VCF 1, at least the high pass filter output of VCF 1, into the VCF 2. Okay. this is a lot to get your head around, and it gets more complicated as we go because VCA1, VCA2, VCA1 has a mixer that includes VCF1, VCF2, okay, and then a sine wave, essentially a sub, a third oscillator. VCA2 will allow for some other options, including a ring modulator, which maybe we'll play with here in a moment. The trigger section is important to this particular patch because what I've done with it is I've got it in single trigger mode, which means I won't re-trigger so let me back up. Triggering on this instrument happens at the VCO level. You can trigger from the keyboard or the sequencer and on the envelopes, which you can probably only see some of, but they can trigger either from keyboard, sequencer, or the external envelope follower, which is a whole nother story, which we're not going to get into this round. So given that I'm triggering everything from the keyboard right now to play, and I'm asking the VCAs to be controlled by the envelopes of my choice, which in this case, both of them are set to envelope C. Okay, we'll get to those in a minute. Given that, I have the ability to leave the filter sort of closed after the initial filter envelope, the EG depth here on these two guys. And by the way, how do I select it? Well, right here. So I've got both filters. Again, I'm trying to sort of create an init patch for us. So we've got envelope A on both filters, and the depth is, minimal. It's slightly up. So if I take it all the way down, nothing will happen. It won't matter if I re-trigger or if I play legato, right? But if I give the envelope some depth, and this is envelope A right here, you can see we've got an attack that's a little slow-ish, and then a decay. That wow sound. All right, so I can re-trigger that every time I release and re-trigger, or I can keep it mellow by connecting everything. And it's a real subtle difference in the playing, but it allows you to do... Here, let me exaggerate it a little more so we can hear it. So, okay, that's maybe a bit much. Okay, let's see. Let's do this. Right, so I can go. And it sounds like I've got some velocity, control, which I don't. This keyboard is from 1977, so it is a simple set of switches that do not respond to anything except for on and off. But that's a feature of the single trigger switch. If I move to multi, it will always re-trigger the VCFs that are set to trigger by keyboard input. So, whereas here I get more control depending on how I release and re-trigger. Okay, and we were just looking there at the envelope depth of the filter, and we're using envelope A. Okay, so there are 5 envelopes, as you can see. Next, though, I want to look at this modulation depth. So there is one master global LFO, which unfortunately is a little bit over here. You can't quite see it. But trust me when I tell you that the envelope, so it's a standard, LFO. You don't get to choose the envelope shape, the LFO shape, until you choose the mod function at the point that you're going to introduce it, which is a really interesting and I think kind of phenomenal way of doing this. It's true here for the VCAs as well. For both VCFs, I've got the mod function set to simple sine waves to start, and the mod depth set about the same. But there is a secret trick with this thing that you can't quite see, and that is that I can modulate the speed of the LFO with an envelope. Aha! And I get to choose any of those 5 envelopes. I've currently chosen envelope E, which again, you can't quite see. It's over off to the side. Apologies for that. But what it means is when I crank the mod depth, you can easily hear that envelope E is modulating the LFO speed. When I make it a little subtle, it gives me a little flutter, just a little flutter that pops through every once in a while. I can make it faster and even go into audio rates, right? When I say faster, I'm increasing the speed of the LFO, and the rate at which the envelope is affecting it travels with that speed increase. You can hear the envelope looping. And the envelope depth will make this even more severe. And of course, I can choose to move the filter even more. In fact, let's just be extreme. Why not? Let's just do it. Mayhem, right? So we are modulating the filter at audio rates, which you can see is both filters at audio rates, which you can see is extremely powerful. And we haven't even gotten into the various mod shapes. So at this intensity and at this speed, we won't hear a lot, but let's see. Yeah, we've got the sawtooth. We can turn it to a sharp. Inverted, we can make it square wave. And of course, sample and hold. And we can also have it follow the envelope follower with an external input. And of course, I'm moving all of these the same way. Why would we do that? Why not separate them? Beautiful. Okay. And we can increase the thing to insane audio rates all the way around. I haven't even mentioned that the VCOs have an incredible range. They will go down to not 16, not 32, but not 64, but 128 foot stop. At least VCO2 will do that. VCO1 goes down to 64. You can begin to see the sound design possibilities here. And we also haven't introduced noise, which, because we're modulating the filter, will be part of this audio rate modulation chaos. And because I have the single multi-trigger thing happening, I can choose when to get that chiff. We can lengthen the chiff. Or have no chiff at all. What a glorious, glorious sound we've got going here. Okay. I mean, this thing is just it's an endless buffet of sound design. Yes, it's a monosynth, but holy cow. One thing I haven't even mentioned is that this has an onboard sequencer, and that can be used to send many different things to different places, because at each envelope and at each VCO, we can choose whether we're controlling or triggering those things by the sequencer or by the keyboard, or in some cases with an external envelope follower trigger. Okay, that's a whole nother story, which we'll get to in another video. But right now I've got this sequencer kind of running through some values, some CV values slowly, and it is triggering, you can't see it, it's a little off the screen, but it's triggering the envelope E, or the third envelope that we have. And that's relevant because that is also what is being used to manipulate the LFO, the global LFO change of speed. So I can use the sequencer to modulate the envelope that is modulating the global LFO rate change. So let me turn that up and let's see what we can do here. I'll actually slow it down so we can hear it, but you're going to hear me change the sequencer speed. Okay, so let's walk through that again because I know that was a lot. So the sequencer is retriggering the envelope E, which is in effect also being used to modulate the speed of the global LFO, okay? Which in turn is affecting the filter. All right, we haven't even touched, I mean, we've barely touched actually most of this. Unbelievable what this thing can do. So currently I mentioned we're listening to, the way I have it set up in a basic patch is that we've got VCO1 to VCF1 to VCA1. And that's just to keep things simple, and everything's going through a low-pass filter. They are being modulated by the same envelopes, just again to keep things basically similar and to keep things kind of sane and out of the sound design realm. But it doesn't take much to alter that. If I give control of VCA1 and 2 over to envelope E, it's effectively being triggered by the sequencer, and we can just do that with one of them. We can give that really nasty stomach gurgling. Why not? Let's add some ring mod. And what are we going to modulate? What are we going to use as our let's use VCO1. I mean, what's happening? It's crazy. What I did here, by the way, in VCA1, since that's what I still have control over on the keyboard, is I added that sub, which is just a sine wave. If I take it out, also bring in VCF2, sorry, the output of it. Well, I'm not going to say we had a plan or a goal, but I will say we had a lot of fun there. Thank you for joining me for another Let's Patch, and stay tuned because there's going to be a lot more like this happening in the future, and I'm not even close to getting into all the things that this thing can do. It is a miracle of engineering, and what a beautiful instrument it is. Thank you for joining me once again, and until next time, everyone be well.